Hi, how's it going? Welcome to Rock and Metal Invasion. My name is Steve. Coming up on the show today, I'm doing Change of Singer Part 2. Last week I did Change of Singer Part 1, and like I said when I did that episode, it was probably going to be a 2 or 3-parter because going through my collection, quite a few bands have ended up changing vocalists for a number of different reasons. And I'm thinking at the moment there's probably going to be one more part. I could probably even go on a bit longer. There's quite a few bands that have done this, maybe just to a limited way, just for one album, or maybe for a number of different albums. They've had a number of different singers, and also some of these changes in vocalists have happened in more recent years, and not so much necessarily back in their sort of prime years. And I've sort of pretty much been focusing on bands who were popular back in the 80s, early 90s, but then changed vocalists, and how that sort of went for them. Now there are bands, of course, who were successful throughout the 80s, had the same vocalist, and then maybe carried on a little bit in through the 90s, and then maybe broke up and then got back together again, or had stayed together throughout the 90s into the 2000s, but at that point started changing vocalists when the band was less popular, and that's a slightly different story, isn't it? So, and also sometimes too, you've had that situation where bands have broken up and then they've got back together again, and the vocalist has also got the band back together again. So you've got two versions of the band. Often it's the guitarist who's then got another vocalist and calling it the old band name, and then the vocalist has got some people together and is also calling it the old band name. So sometimes you've got for example, LA Guns, Queensryche. There's been a few examples where bands have been, there's been sort of two versions of the band. In fact, there was one quite recently, Rough Cut. There was two versions of Rough Cut, and then they changed their name a little bit so that it was, identifiable as so-and-so's Rough Cut. But I'm not going to focus on those ones too much. I'm going to more look at, but that might be something to discuss when I do a part 3. But I think today I'm focusing on those bands who were successful throughout the 80s, early 90s, or however successful, maybe not that successful, but they were sort of putting out albums in the 80s and early 90s, and then for their next follow-up album, for a subsequent album, they changed vocalists. And of course, that's a big deal because, people really associate the sound of a band usually to the vocalist. And, obviously the guitar player is a big part of it as well. They use the guitarist and the vocalist, often the two main sort of stars of the band. Not to discount, of course, other members of the band as well, but they're big parts of it. And often they're the people who are given the most attention. Which is possibly why when we have these situations where bands break off and you've got sort of two versions of the band, one version has the guitar player, the other version has the vocalist. Of course, there are some exceptions to that. Leather Wolf, there's a Leather Wolf going on at the moment and there's only one Leather Wolf, but the only original member of Leather Wolf is the drummer, and so the other members of the band have got other projects, but that's an unusual one where it's Leather Wolf, but it's only really the drummer that's the main member. And there's a bit of controversy with that as well, but let's not get into that at the moment. So let's get into it, So change of singer. This is Tiger Tails. Now this is, of course, Young and Crazy, their debut album. They're a Welsh band. They've got a bit of a Poison vibe, haven't they? It's total glam metal. This is my favourite Tiger Tails album. I quite like this one because although it's definitely glam metal, it's a little bit heavier than say Poison, and some catchy songs on here. But there were some issues, I think, when they were out touring. And interestingly enough, the vocalist Stevie James actually produced this album as well. So he must have been not just there to sing. He must have had a lot to do with the band and the band, um, the music they were producing and so forth. But he was out of the band. There was some conflict when they were on tour. He's out of the band, and he is replaced by Kim Hooker. So Stevie James replaced by Kim Hooker for Berserk, and I guess it's fairly similar to the previous album. This came out in 1990, I think, and yeah, 1990. It says here, no hair extensions, no wigs, no surgery. Yeah. Yeah, not as good for me, but this was probably more successful than their previous album. Love Bomb Baby's quite a well-known song. I do like the art on this. I think it looks really good. So this is a gatefold, and I actually think that looks pretty cool. But came out on Music for Nations and custom label here, which I think is pretty cool. But they did release, I think, like a B-sides album or something a couple of years after that, and then they split up for a while. And then again, there was all this sort of fighting over owning of the name, and there were different versions of the band with slightly different variations on the name. And they've sort of still going off and on a little bit. But Pepsi Tate, the bass player, he unfortunately died in 2007. So there's different members of the band now. But an example where they changed vocalists and possibly had more success. But the problem is, after 1990, that type of sound really became less popular. So that didn't help them. All right, moving on now. Next band, Loudness. This is Hurricane Eyes. Now, they'd released quite a number of albums up to this album, but this I think was the third album that they had released on Echo, major label, and this was produced by Eddie Kramer, but the previous two had been produced by Max Norman, and yeah, great. All three of those albums are fantastic. But the vocalist on here is Japanese vocalist Minoru Nihara. I don't know if I'm saying that right. I apologize if I'm not. But anyway, so he was the original vocalist, and I think he actually sounds pretty good. I mean, those three albums that are on Echo, I think are really good. But for whatever reason, I guess maybe the fact that they thought they might be more successful to have an English vocalist, they recruited Mike Facera, and he comes in. So he's an American singer. He comes in for this album, Soldiers of Fortune, which is not a bad album, but for me, it's not as good as the three previous albums. I like Danger of Love. That's a really good song. I like that song on this album, but apart from that, it's okay. It's okay. I like having in my collection, but I don't think the change of vocalist was an improvement. Yeah, I mean, Loudness is a solid band, still going strong. Actually, they've reverted back to their original vocalist. So he's still the original vocalist is now back as the vocalist for Loudness, and they've released a lot of albums. Still releasing albums. So yeah, they're still going. But Mike Facera, of course, he's been in a number of bands. He's been with Malmsteen. He did Obsession. He was in the band Obsession. Mike Facera Project. So yeah, you can find him in quite a few bands and projects as well. Next one, this is King Cobra. Now, this is actually their first album, I think. Yeah, Ready to Strike. They did a couple of albums with Mark Free, who's now Marcy Free, but he left, and so for their third album, they got in Johnny Edwards. Now, actually, originally before even Johnny Edwards came in, they did for a while have Mark Turan from Bullet Boys, so he came in. Mark Turan came in, but then he left and he took Mick Sweeter, who plays guitar on this album. He took Mick Sweeter with him, and they formed the Bullet Boys. So I think John Northrup comes in for this album. This is Kingdom Comes. It's a bit battered, that front cover. But I'm so sort of about this whole album. I'm not that fussed about it not being in the best condition. Happy to have it, but I'm not worried about having a great album cover. But so Northrup comes in, Sweeter's gone, and so Mark Turan did come in, but then didn't stay around to record anything officially. And so Johnny Edwards is the vocalist on this one. So Johnny Edwards comes in on vocals. I don't think he was particularly well known at the time, and that album wasn't successful. Of course, the main man on that album is, of course, Carmine Appice on drums, or Appice. So after King Cobra 3 sort of doesn't really do much, he takes off, does various things. Of course, Blue Mood, I think, is probably the next thing he went on to do. But Johnny Edwards doesn't really work out with King Cobra, but then he ends up getting a pretty big gig, really. It's so Lou Gramm was the vocalist in Foreigner, a massive band, of course. This is the last album. This was the last album before the breakup, first breakup. So Inside Information. I really like this album. People don't talk this album up very much, but I think I really like it. I guess the idea of Lou Gramm leaving the band, or maybe the idea of it happening, perhaps was being flirted with a little bit when Lou went off and did a couple of great solo albums, and then for whatever reason, I did read his autobiography, but he leaves the band and he forms Shadow King, which is a great album. I really like his 2 solo albums, and I really like Shadow King. So I'm actually not that upset that he left Foreigner, because I sort of feel his solo work and the stuff he did with Shadow King was actually better. But I think that was part of the problem. I think he wanted to go heavier. Mick Jones maybe more commercial. But anyway, so Lou is out of the band. They need a new vocalist, and for the next album, it's Johnny Edwards. So he had been in King Cobra, so he comes in on vocals. This is the only album he appears on for Foreigner. This is Unusual Heat. Low Down and Dirty, I must admit, is a great song. It's actually probably one of Foreigner's heaviest songs. It was the first single, I think, from this album. Really good song. But the album wasn't a massive hit for them. But it's not a bad album, not bad, but I must admit, nothing as good as Low Down and Dirty comes up on this album. And actually, Lou Gramm comes back in, 2 or 3 years later, for Mr. Moonlight, I think the album was, which was, not the best, but it came out in 93. Something like that. So, it was a different sort of sound perhaps they were going for at that in that time. And then, of course, Lou's out again now, and they've got Kelly Hansen, who was once in Hurricane. He's doing the vocals now. So there. So that's the story of Foreigner. All right, next one, Danger Danger. This is their debut album. Really good album. It's very much, I guess, what you would call a hair metal album. Quite commercial. Some great hooks on it. There's keyboards here. There's production by Lance Quinn, who sort of he did the first 2 Bon Jovi albums, and there's definitely some Bon Jovi vibes coming off this one. Naughty Naughty was one of the singles. I actually quite like that song. Lyrically, of course, it's not the best, but it's a pretty catchy song, and I was quite surprised. I liked it. Some of the other songs on here are okay. There's a few songs that really I'm not that fussed about. I know some people quite like the next album as well, but which you can get on vinyl, but it's really not easy to get. But actually, I'm not, apart from the song Beat the Bullet, I'm not that fussed about the follow-up album. But they do make a bit of a comeback when they release, and it's a real surprise, For the Hard Way. But when For the Hard Way came out, it was sung by, initially I think by their original vocalist Ted Poley, but then they changed vocalists and go to Paul Lane, and so he ends up singing. I think you can get both versions. Both versions are available, but I think initially it was just Paul Lane was the vocalist on the initial release of For the Hard Way, which may have only been released in Japan, at least initially again. But what an album. This is like their best album, I think. It's such a surprise because it came out in like 1997 maybe. I'm not sure when it was recorded. This is what my one says, 1997. But I tell you, there's not much that came out in the mid to late 90s that sort of fitted that hair metal sound that was actually, that really got me interested. But I tell you what, you got to check out Going, Going, Gone. What a great song that is. It's one of my favorite sort of hard rock songs. It's brilliant. So check that one out. But also Going All the Way is also a good song. Some solid tracks on this one. Really good. Like I said, Paul Lane's on this one. Paul Lane had released this album, Stick It in Your Ear. This was what came out on Elektra in 1990, I think. Yeah, 1990. But really, this is a good album too. Talking of good songs, We Are the Young. That would be my standout track from this one. So yeah, he'd been around. And then he's got a couple of solo albums at least. But so there was that. And then he ends up joining Danger, and he's still in a few bands as well, and doing releasing single stuff, solo stuff also. So if you want to, you can check him out. But Ted Poley, of course, as well has had joined other bands and done solo projects also. So so there we go. That's the story of Danger there. So change of vocalist. Now this is a very famous and well-known change of vocalists. I'm talking about Motley Crue. So, of course, Motley Crue, they're huge in '89. This is their biggest album ever, Dr. Feelgood. It's really massive for them. Lots of hits. I mean, they'd already been a big band, but this one just took them over the top, right? Took them to the next level. Songs like, the title track and then Kickstart My Heart's on here. Don't Go Away Mad. So it did really well for them. And then they released their Decade of Decadence, which also was successful, sort of like a greatest hits with some great, Primal Scream's a great new song on that album. And I think there would have been a lot of anticipation for the next album, but, there were some disagreements, maybe about the direction they wanted to go. Again, I've read the dirt, and, sometimes you feel like you read these books and you're still not really sure exactly who left who, what happened. It all gets a bit, sometimes it's very confusing to know exactly what happened. So I don't even think sometimes the people in the band truly know, but there's a breakup and, Vince Neil goes off and decides to do a solo album. So he puts out this album here, which I'm lucky enough to have on vinyl. It's called Exposed. Some people call this the sort of lost Motley Crue album because it basically is very similar to Motley Crue. They're definitely the sound. They're not changing their sound at all. This came out in 92, I think. And, hair metal is definitely starting to become less popular. But, Vince is like still sticking to his guns as far as, the type of music that he wants to do. So yeah, very much still in the sort of what you would expect from a Motley Crue album. Some good songs on here. I think it's pretty good. I actually also like the follow-up album as well, where he did go a little bit industrial. Got some producers in who sort of added some techno sort of elements to it. But I still thought it was a good album. It still has some guitars on there. Of course, Stevie Stevens is on this one, along with a few other quite well-known names. But and some songwriters coming in to help him out there too. But it's okay. It's a pretty good album. I like it. Nice to have that one on vinyl. But I don't have the Motley Crue album on vinyl, unfortunately. So this is the one where they bring in John Karobi, and it's a good album. Of course, people took this album out quite a lot. For some people, it's their favorite Motley Crue album, but it does not really sound like the what you sort of associate that Motley Crue sound to be. So yeah, it's got all the original members except a change of vocalist, but it's also got, this came out I think in '94, definitely got a change of sound as well. It's a really good sound. And of course, no doubting this, the vocals from John Karobi are great, and he nearly stayed in the band to then be on their next album as well, but probably a little bit of pressure from the record company. This didn't sell. Got to get Vince back, and Vince's albums aren't selling either. So yeah, we'll get back together again. So that's kind of what happened there. But yeah, it's a good album. I do have the Hooligan's Holiday 12-inch single on vinyl, but hopefully one day they're going to re-release that. Because Motley Crue have been reissuing and re-releasing all their albums on vinyl, but for whatever reason, the Motley Crue one, they're not almost like trying to forget about it, But there's a lot of people who love to see that reissued on vinyl, so hopefully that'll happen one day. All right, coming up now, a band called Icon. Now, they weren't super big in the 80s, but for those who like them, they're a bit of a cult band. They're certainly very acknowledged as being a really, really good, solid hard rock band from the 80s. This is their second album, Night of the Crime. Less heavy probably than their first album, which was sort of verging on sort of heavy metal. This is now sort of more melodic, even a little AOR, very commercial. But I think for me, it's better. It's really catchy stuff. They've got some outside songwriters coming in, but yeah, I mean, especially the first side, were just awesome, really good. I still play this now, still enjoy listening to it. The vocalist on here is Stephen Clifford. He sounds really good vocalist. I think Dan Wexler is sort of the driving force of the band. He's on guitars. And yeah, this I highly recommend this album. But they then get together with a new vocalist, Jerry Harrison, and they released a More Perfect Union, which is more of an independent release. So I don't have that. You can track it down or probably hear it online. But so they get together and change a vocalist. Initially, they sort of release something independently, but then they do eventually get a release on Megaforce, and this is Right Between the Eyes. So they released that with Jerry Harrison on vocals. And this is also a really good album. I like the fact this album probably gets a little bit heavier than the previous album, but it's still really melodic. Lots of good songs on here, but Holy Man's War, that's like almost 7 minutes long, that song. Really good song, really like that one. And A Far Cry, also really good. So those are my two standout songs. So I was really disappointed that they didn't sort of carry on after this, because I thought they wanted something with this album, but there we go. This 89, but this was, of course, I guess their third album. Wasn't successful, and that was kind of it. All right, moving on now to another well-known change of vocalist. So, except, of course, with Udo on vocals. This is the last one with Udo before the breakup. Metal Heart, great album. But, I think they decided a little bit, it's maybe a little bit like what happened with Loudness, maybe we get like an American vocalist in, it might be a bit more successful. So that's what happens. And in comes David Reese, who is a great vocalist, no doubt about it. Maybe just not the right vocalist, perhaps, for Accept. But there are some good songs on this album. In particular, I like Prisoner. That's a really good song. Yeah. Otherwise, it's not the greatest. But no doubting the quality of the vocals from David Reese. I'm a huge Bangalore Choir fan. I thought that album is just awesome, so he sings on that one. But yeah, he doesn't stick around for too long. I think there might have been some disagreement between him and Peter Baltes. But I'm not sure. But there was some bust up, or maybe they just decided that actually having an American vocalist hasn't really done the trick. So they go back to Udo, and they're together for a while. And of course now they're Now they've got Mark Tornello, who was the vocalist in TT Quick. He's now their vocalist. All right, next up, this is the best of Tigers of Pantang. So basically, their first album they had Jess Cox on vocals just for their first album, and then Jess Cox, and then they went to John Deverell after that. Good, really good, solid. Sometimes put in the new wave of British heavy metal category. Really good hard rock. They've actually still been releasing albums recently, which are really good, actually, really worth checking out. But of course, their 80s stuff as well is still popular. Of course, John Sykes was a guitarist in the band there for a couple of albums, so worth tracking down. And the vocalist from their first album, Jess Cox, I do have it, but I didn't get it out to show. But he also has released a solo album as well, which is perhaps not the greatest, but but it's available if you want to check it out. But yeah, Tigers of Pantang, change vocalist there. All right, pretty much coming to the end. We're of part two. A couple of big names now to finish off with. So Iron Maiden, of course. Now they've had three different vocalists, haven't they? So of course they started off with Paul Di'Anno, then they moved to Bruce Dickinson, and then a little bit like what happened with Vince maybe and Motley Crue, or some of the other. There's probably some other examples where, or Lou Gramm from Foreigner, whether they're releasing their solo album, or they're thinking about releasing a solo album, and they decide, I'm going to do it, I'm going to leave, or I'm losing interest in my main band, and I guess that's what happened with Bruce Dickinson. He released a solo album. He's still in the band at that point, but then the musical landscape is changing as well. Iron Maiden, very popular now, but mid to early 90s, they really didn't. They were starting to lose popularity, and for whatever reason. Again, I've read Bruce Dickinson's autobiography. I'm still not exactly sure what happened there. But anyway, so he takes off, and Blaze Bayley comes in from Wolfsbane, and probably not. So this only covers up to 1989. These ones, this was the best of 1990 to 2010. So this has some Blaze songs on it. So a couple of albums there. Interestingly enough, they don't feature very many songs on this. I think it's like 1, 2. There's just 3 songs on all. And there's a lot of songs on here, but just 3 songs from the 2 Blaze albums. But and I'm not, to be honest, overly familiar with those albums. I'm more with Iron Maiden, more the earlier sort of, this. All the songs on this album I'm totally familiar with. This one is actually fairly new to me. Getting this album, it's great to have a collection of the 1990 to 2010 tracks. But I'm not so up on the albums released during this time. So like I said, nice to have. But I'm not overly familiar, so I'm not really going to make a judgment of too much about Blaze and the albums he was on. But they weren't popular. And so they go back to Bruce Dickinson, which is almost exactly what happened with this band here, Judas Priest. So I guess you could argue the difference is perhaps Painkiller was a really great last album to have the original vocalist, their current vocalist on. So Rob Halford sung on this, a highly regarded album, a real return to form. Perhaps that wasn't quite so much the case with Iron Maiden, when it was Fear of the Dark, wasn't it? Yeah, so when Fear of the Dark, after Bruce left after Fear of the Dark, and that's perhaps not regarded as one of their better albums. So, but in this case, they seem to be on a bit of a roll here. I mean, it wasn't a huge album for them. In fact, it wasn't that successful, I don't think, initially. It's more like critically acclaimed. Got to remember when this came out, metal was starting to lose popularity a little bit. But yeah, so, and Halford, he wanted to go off and do sort of stuff that Pantera were kind of doing. So he had Fight and, Priest eventually hook up with Tim Ripper Owens, released a couple of albums, just like Iron Maiden did. But then again, just like Iron Maiden, reunite with their original vocalist, and still with their original vocalist now. So there we go. Or when I say that, just like Iron Maiden, of course, I guess Bruce Dickinson wasn't the original vocalist, but their previous vocalist. So yeah, there we go. So that's Change of Singers Part 2. So yeah, there's quite a wide variety of some well-known and some lesser-known bands there who have changed vocalists. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed that. I've enjoyed sort of going through my collection, looking at the change of vocalists, and just reviewing some of those albums. A good band's usually a good band, and often when they've changed vocalists, it's still a good band, or there's still good songs. But you do get used to a certain vocalist, don't you? And sometimes it can be hard to accept a change in vocals when that happens. All right. Well, there will be a part 3. I'm not sure. I might leave it for a little while though, and do something else next time. But thanks again for watching. If you haven't subscribed and you enjoy this type of content, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Leave any comments or questions. That's always great. I always make sure I reply and respond to those. And I'll see you next time. Okay. Bye for now.